What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. This is Josh, one of your Linode developer advocates, and today I want to show you guys some more MySQL. And if you missed my other videos, let me explain. MySQL is an open source relational database system, and just like in the other videos, this will be considered an introduction, and I will cover some of the basics that will build upon what we learned in past videos. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. So in the last videos, I covered how to manage the database system using the command line. Now in this video, I will cover how to manage those databases using a graphical user interface tool called MySQL Workbench. Now, MySQL Workbench provides data modeling, SQL development, and comprehensive administration tools for server configuration, user administration, backups, and a whole lot more. And also today, I'll be using one of Linode's newest products called Managed Databases to cover the database demonstration portion of the video. So let's hop over to Linode right fast so I can show you guys how to set up a managed database on their platform. Now I'm logged into my Linode account, and one thing I wanted to point out that the managed database feature that Linode added to their platform is currently under a beta. And if you look on the left hand side, you'll see databases, and that's the beta version of the managed databases. Now I already have a server set up, but I wanted to walk you guys through how to actually set up a database cluster using Linode's managed database platform. And pretty much all you have to do is click create database cluster, and this will walk you through the process of actually setting up your managed database. Now, currently, the only database engine that's available is MySQL, but in the future, there'll be other database management systems available to you. But this works out perfectly for what I'm going to show you guys, since what I'll be talking about is MySQL Workbench, which is made by Oracle and the same company that creates MySQL or provides MySQL. So in order to create your cluster, first thing you want to do is create a name for it or a cluster label. You can name it whatever. As you can see, I use an example of test cluster to create my other cluster that I'll be using for the demonstration. So I'll just click that because I'm not going to create the database. I just want to walk you through these steps. And then the next step is to select a engine, which we'll use MySQL version 8.0.26. So we can click that. And then the next thing is to select a region. So this means the closest data center to you. This is typically what you want to select. And so I'm on the West Coast, so I'll select Fremont, California. And then the next thing is the plan. They have a whole bunch of plans to meet all your different needs depending on your application. So you just select your plan. So I'm gonna just select the dedicated 4 gigabytes, and then down here is where you select your nodes, the number of nodes that you want within the cluster. Now you can do a 1 node cluster, and you can also do a 3 node cluster, and this is typically used for high availability. And I wouldn't recommend starting out using the high availability because it's for a production environment. Now, if you have a production application that you're going to run using this database, then definitely use the 3 node cluster. But if you're just developing something or testing it out, then the 1 node is fine. But I'll select 3 nodes just for this demonstration. And like I said, I'm not going to move forward past this step because it takes a while to actually set up the cluster, about 10 minutes or so to actually create the full cluster. And then also I wanted to point out that this notice right here, it says there is no charge for database clusters during beta, and the database clusters will be subject to charge when the data period ends on May 2nd, 2022. So just showing you guys that you can go in and you won't be charged because they're testing out the system to make sure it'll run properly for customers that need this service. And if we scroll down a little further, this is where you add your access control, basically the IP address that you'll be connecting from. So for instance, if I'm connecting to this cluster from my home network, then I will want to put my outside IP address here. And I don't want to click in here because it might bring up my personal home IP address, and I don't want you guys to see that. But you typically can just go to Google and type what's my IP, find out what your IP address is, and drop it in here, and that will allow you to connect to this database engine from your network. And this is an awesome security feature that they included within this process to make your server a whole lot more secure. Now, once you do that, all you have to do is hit create database cluster, and it'll create your cluster. And now we'll switch over to the cluster that I already created. I want to show you guys what you'll see once the database cluster has been created. So if we click on our cluster, this will provide you all the cluster configuration as well as the connection details. As you can see, the status is active, as well as the version of MySQL that's installed on the cluster. And then the nodes, there is a primary and 2 replicas. And just to do a little bit of explanation of what a cluster is and the nodes that are in it, basically look at it as 3 different servers that house the same version of MySQL. And they basically work together. So if one server goes down for whatever reason, it could be a power outage or something like that, a failure with the hard drives, then your database will move over to your other nodes. So you don't have any downtime. And that's the purpose of creating a cluster. It's mainly for redundancy. And then just to show you some other features, you can check out the backups. They do have backups for you. And they also have settings that you can go in and actually check out for yourself. You can reset the root password. This is your access control list, as well as delete the cluster. And then another feature of it is basically setting a maintenance window, which is beneficial so Linode will know when to update your system, as well as the frequency of that maintenance window. Now let's drop down to my command line because I want to show you guys how to connect using these connection details. And basically the username is linroot, and then there is our password. It's randomly generated when they create the cluster, as well as the host name. So you can grab the host name, and then also the private network host name. And that's beneficial if you have a private network on Linode's platform, in order for other servers in your network to actually connect to this MySQL backend for whatever application that you have set. And then the default port, and this is basically the default port for MySQL 3306, as well as SSL enabled, which is awesome. And it's great that they actually enable SSL because that's the main way you want to connect to a SQL server. That way your connection is secure. Now let's go on and test that our cluster is up and running properly, and I'll show you guys the command to actually connect to it. And I'm basically just testing our connection, and this is something that you want to do whenever you create a MySQL server as well as a cluster on Linode's platform. You want to verify that you have a connection, and the easiest way to verify that is by using the MySQL client that you can install on your machine. And so the command is very simple. All we have to do is type MySQL. Once you have, the client installed, this is basically the command that you want to type. So MySQL space -- host. And then what you want to do is put your host in there. So we're going to put the equal sign, and let's switch back over to the browser so we can grab our host name. And it's basically the host, not the private network host, but the regular host name. So you grab that just by basically hitting the copy button right here, and then switch back over to your terminal and paste that in there. So that's our host name. Now the next thing we want to put is our user, which is that linroot user. So all we have to do is type -- user and then equals linroot. And then next you want to put dash dash password. And this basically is specifying that you want to put the password in once it makes a connection to the host. It's going to ask you for that password. And then lastly, another option that you want to put is dash dash SSL. And this is basically specifying to the client that this server has SSL enabled on it, so it has to be a secure connection, because if you don't put that in there, it's going to error out. It's not going to allow you to connect to it, because by default the MySQL client doesn't connect over SSL securely, so you have to specify it. And then all we have to do is press enter at this point, and it's going to ask us for our password. So we can switch back over to our connection details, and then let's hit show on our password, and then we can hit the copy button now, and that'll copy our password for us. And then go back to the terminal and paste that in there. Now, one thing, when you paste it, you won't see it paste, because anytime you enter passwords on a Linux server or a Linux system, it masks the passwords by default. So it looks as though nothing was pasted there, but it was pasted there, and all we have to do is press enter, and that will allow us to connect to our MySQL server. And as you can see, we are connected. It says welcome to MarianDB monitor, commands in with the semicolon or -G, and this is your base information of the server right there. So it has that server version, MySQL community server, and pretty much the same thing I've shown you in previous videos on how to actually use MySQL from the command line. So now that we've verified that we can connect to our MySQL cluster, let's go down and quit, and we can switch over to MySQL Workbench and create our connection there. And then I'll show you guys how to use the GUI tool. So let's press exit. That'll get us out of it. Now, before I cover MySQL Workbench, I want to show you guys where you can actually download the application. So I'll drop the link down in the description of the video of MySQL Workbench. It's basically mysql.com/products/workbench. And this is where you can download MySQL Workbench. And MySQL Workbench is available on Windows, Mac OS, as well as Linux. And so all you have to do is click the downloads button and select the operating system that you have, which, like I said, it's available on Microsoft Windows, Linux, as well as Mac OS, and just download that file and install it. Or if you're on a Linux operating system, then you can install it from the command line. It's in majority of distributions repositories in order for you to install on your operating system. Now let's switch over to the desktop so we can walk through MySQL Workbench. Okay, so once you have it installed, this is what you're greeted with once you open up the actual application. And it will basically state welcome to MySQL Workbench, and it basically covers what MySQL Workbench is all about. It's basically a GUI tool for MySQL, and this will allow us to connect to our database and basically manipulate the server just like we did from the command line. Now, the first thing you want to do when opening up MySQL Workbench is to create a connection. So let's walk through that process right fast. All we have to do is hit the plus. This will pop up there. It'll say MySQL connections, and this is where all your MySQL connections will be listed once you add them to your system. So all you have to do is hit the plus, and then we can go through and add our server. And just like how I broke down the command from the MySQL client, the way you connect it, you basically drop the same information into MySQL Workbench, and this will allow you to connect to the server. So the first thing you want to do is create a connection name. Now, what I typically do for the connection name is just name it the same as the cluster that I'm actually connecting to. So this is test-cluster, which is what I have it named on Linode. So I'll just leave it that. The connection mode, what we'll be using is a standard TCP IP, because that's essentially what the command line is doing as well. Now there are other options. There is local socket, standard TCP over SSH if you're using Linux, and this server you have SSH access to it, you can use that as well as a secure connection versus having an SSL cert. But since we're using an SSL cert, it doesn't matter. The connection is secure via that SSL cert that's installed on the server. And you also have LDAP, which is a username and password, as well as LDAP, SSL, and Kerberos, which is typically used in Microsoft environments when you're connecting to a server via Active Directory, and then also native Kerberos. So like I said, we're going to use standard TCP IP. Now the first one, or the first parameter you want to put in is the host name, and they put some defaults in here because typically a lot of people have their server installed on their local machine. So 127.0.0.1 is basically your home address. And what we want to do is put our host name that's in our Linode connections details from the site. So let's switch over to the website again and grab our host name right fast, and then switch back over to our desktop and drop in our host name. We can paste that in there, and we're good to go. It uses the standard port of 3306. And then the username is linroot, and that's pretty much all we have to put in there. You can set a default scheme, but you can also leave it blank and set it later. Now you don't have to mess with any of these other tabs, at least for this instance. When connecting to Linode, it's gonna have it set, the default is use SSL if available, so it will definitely use the SSL connection, so we don't have to specify anything. And if we have keys, we can install them. The client keys, we can install them if you need to, but we won't cover that. That's a little bit more advanced for this video. And then some advanced settings under here, which I'm not going to go through, but there are some advanced settings that you can mess around with in here, but this is typically all you need. So let's go down and test our connection. You can hit test connection right here, boom, and it'll pop up asking us for that password, just like what it did in the command line. So let's switch back over to our connections and grab our password right fast, and then switch back over to our desktop and drop in our password. And we can save this password to our keychain, and this is a Linux thing. This is basically storing that password within what they call a keychain that manages a lot of your different passwords on your system. So as soon as you log into your desktop environment, that password is available to use for this specific connection. But we're not going to do that this time. We're just going to hit OK, and that will test our connection. As you can see, it pops up with a box that basically says successfully made the MySQL connection, and then information about it, SSL enabled with the key, and then right here it says a successful MySQL connection was made with the parameters defined for the connection. So as long as you see that, that means that you put in all the information properly. So let's press OK, and now we can connect to our server. So all we have to do is press OK right there, and that'll close out that dialog, and we can connect to our server by just clicking on it. And it may or may not ask for the password. It did not ask for the password because we just typed it in, you know, a few seconds ago, so it was stored, and it allowed us to connect to it. And so let's go through the navigation of MySQL Workbench. I just kind of wanted to cover it a little bit. Right now we're connected to that test client or test cluster. So let's cover the menus at the top. Basically, we have a file, so you can create new models, new query tab, and that's basically opening up another query tab, open models, open SQL scripts, and some of this stuff you won't understand. I'm just doing a brief overview so you guys can get the picture of how the application works. But you have your edit, which you can get to your preferences, you know, copy, paste, all that good stuff. Now your views, you could change, you know, the way the application is viewed. Queries, you can execute queries using, you know, buttons up here, which is beneficial. And then database, you can connect to a different database server This is the server information, so you can check the server status, which I'm going to show you guys a lot of this information under the administrative tab over here. But tools, configurations, utilities, scripting, so shell scripting, new script, open script. You can install plugins, modules, and the plugin manager. And then we have our help, and that'll allow you to get to documentation as well as MySQL's website to help you through your process of actually using MySQL Workbench. Now, as you can see, we already have a database created, and this is basically a test database that I created within this cluster, so I can show you guys that you can create your databases in here and access them directly from MySQL Workbench. And if we go through this database, you'll see that we have tables and also data. You can run your queries from here. Like for instance, this is the departments table. And if you guys watch my previous videos, you'll remember that I did select queries, a whole bunch of queries on these tables. So let's just hit select rows, and let's select the first 1,000 rows, which it'll grab as many rows that they have within the table. But as you can see, it typed out our query for us. So that's typically what we would have wrote in the command line. It's basically writing it up here. And we can actually add to this query if we wanted to, just like what we were doing in the command line. So let's type where department. And one cool thing about it, it'll give you options based on what you type. So it already knows that I'm looking at department. So basically a column within the table. As well as the tables down here as well if you were doing that. But the first thing it pulls up is column. So what I wanted to do is type in department column, and then we could type equals finance. And then we could run that query again and just show you some of these options right here. You do have a open button, save, run the query, which is what I was finna do right fast. And when you run that query, it'll give you the information, or put the output right below. As you can see, I probably typed something wrong. So let's back this off right fast and run a query again. I just want to see what I messed up on. I think I might have typed something wrong. Oh no, I didn't. Department name. So let's put paste in there. Oh, and we have to put it in quotes. That's what the problem is. So I need to put it in double quotes, and then let's run it again because we're looking for text within the column. So let's run the query again, and it should run properly. And as you can see, it pulled the finance row based on our query up there. So that's basically how you run queries, and you can develop up here within this query tab, and you can create multiple query tabs. And that's where the query tab up here comes in handy. If you hit query, you can execute all, and that'll execute all the open query tabs that you have. So that's beneficial if you have, you know, multiple things going on and you're trying to develop something or create files and test a procedure of some sort by running multiple queries. Then you have that option there. Now, just to show you guys a little more, you can edit your tables and you can create new tables. So if we right click on here, you have some options to create tables. You can create a table like a specific table, search table data, table data import wizard. So if you have a table that you have to import, you can do that as well. Now that's enough about the databases. I didn't want to go too deep into that because I kind of covered a lot of it. If you watch those other videos, you'll understand how to run queries, and that's essentially what you need to understand there. Now under the administrative tasks, this allows you to check the server status as well as client connections, and I'll go through each one of these one at a time because it opens it up in a new tab up here. But as you can see, this is the test information or the test cluster server information, and it's also tracking the loads and basically all the information about the server, like the buffer usage and traffic and all that good stuff. And then you have your client connection, so you check the client's user and privileges, which is an important part of it. You can go through and create users for specific databases and manage it all from here versus doing it from the command line. And then there are systems variables and status variables as well built into the actual system. Data export, You can go through and export data. You can import data or restore data. So if you exported a database, you can import it directly from here. And then you have your instances down here, which a lot of this stuff is grayed out because I don't think you have access to it. But you also have performance, so you can check out the dashboard for the performance for the server. And then also performance reports, you can run that, but it looks like it's not enabled. Then performance scheme setup. So I just kind of wanted to cover some of that administrative stuff that's in here, but your schemes is where your database is going to be. So you're good to go there. And that's pretty much MySQL Workbench. And I covered a whole lot in this video, but I really wanted to show you guys a way of working with MySQL Server using a GUI tool, and Workbench is that perfect tool that I want you guys to actually check out if you're getting into learning and using MySQL, or if you already have a good understanding of MySQL and you're developing an application and you don't want to run a lot of your commands from the command line, then you have this GUI tool available to you. So I hope today's video was helpful in getting you guys a better understanding of using MySQL, as well as the GUI tool MySQL Workbench. As you can see, it's very useful for you to have a good understanding of how to use this tool and the benefits of actually using the managed databases provided by Linode. As always, thank you so much for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions, please check out the Linode community site, and the link will be down in the description of the video. See you guys in the next video. Peace.